in the world now
Sorry.
with COVID. That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine with me if you want to start with that. And then I think that, what we're talking about is kind of some of the larger changes we see coming. So I think it's a great way.
Okay, perfect. That'll just get us started rather than going right to another screen.
Cool.
All right.
How many people do we have signed up?
Last I checked, it was 115. So it's actually tied for our last webinar, which was our most well attended to that point.
Cool. So we'll see how many people show up. I've been noticing, at least during the pandemic, it was like 40%. So,
yeah, that's probably about. I think we probably do a little bit better than that in general. But certainly, I think as I do the same thing, I sign up for things knowing that if I miss it, I will get the link and can watch it later.
Mm-hmm.
So,
really,
sure, I've got all my links together. And I'll probably wait and put those, well, I don't know. Do you want me to do those at the beginning or the end?
maybe both. Just spam them.
Yep.
And then, let me get my windows all set up here.
I like your top. That's marbleized. Yeah?
Yes. I went shopping when I was in New York.
Very cool. Oh,
Like the gigantic 80s size top. It's so funny. And you're supposed to wear it with big pants too. I'm like, no, I can't do that. I can only wear it with like skinny jeans.
I love how skinny jeans are like out, but I'm like so skinny jean. I'm like, I'm sorry. I guess that makes me old, but
I know.
I am. So.
Well, from what my research, they're still okay. You just have to have some variety, which I do not. I'm pretty much strictly skinny jean silhouette, so I've got to branch out a little.
Right. Or if it's a high-waisted skinny jean, that's okay.
Yeah, there you
but
go.
I don't do those either. So.
I don't do those either. I just remember growing up with those high-waisted, and I just find the lower waist is just more comfortable. So
I know. I'm trying to work on that.
Terrible looking. I think if you have no shape, then they're actually flattering.
Yes. That is true.
I have to remember to look at the camera.
Yes.
No, it helps if the panelists are all at the top. If you switch your view, because then your eyes are really just right below the camera.
Okay, cool. I'm going to do that.
So you just, I like that. That's good. That's a good tip.
That is a good tip.
You.
Because otherwise it's hard to talk to the person and not see them, I find that really hard.
Yeah. Okay,
so
cool.
After, I'm going to do my brief intro, just so y'all know, I know you've done these before, but after I do just the brief, here's the title, here's what the ITA is, here's Catherine, I'm going to cut my camera off, but y'all will still see me on your side, but the audience won't see me once my camera and microphone are off, and then I'll jump back on when we start doing questions.
So should I cover mine?
No, we'll all be on it first, and I'll just say welcome, and then, but I just want y'all to know that if you see my little headshot sitting there, everybody's not seeing that because it looks weird. Muniz, correct?
Muniz, yes.
Okay.
I know. I always tell people my name rhymes with Donna. It makes everybody's life so much easier. Like, I thought it was so complicated.
I wish mine was that easy. Muniz. People, if you know Spanish, people are like, isn't it? And then they'll be like, isn't it Muniz, with the tilde? And I'm like, well, yes, technically it is, but for most Americans, Muniz is fine. I'm not.
All right, it's 2:00. Are y'all ready?
All right. Yep. Yes.
All right, I'm going to cut it on, and we'll just wait 30 seconds or so before I start. So, okay. We are live. We'll give it just a second to let people sign in. There's still a lot of people coming in, so I'm just going to wait a little bit longer.
Love it. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see everybody coming on. I see a lot of familiar names.
Fun. I see so many friends coming in. Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
So great.
Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for How to Design for the Future with forecaster Julie Muniz and textile designer Sana Baker. My name is Carrie Dillon. I am the Managing Director of the International Textile Alliance, or ITA. The ITA is a not-for-profit business association whose members include textile mills, leather tanneries, trimmings manufacturers, and suppliers to the industry. We host the biannual Showtime Market, and we also have an educational foundation that is focused on educating our members, like we're doing today, and bringing new talent into the industry. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Catherine Richardson. Catherine is the Vice President of Sales for Libaco, as well as a volunteer member and incoming president for the ITA Board of Directors. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and have this really fascinating conversation about designing for the future, which feels like it's changing every moment of the day these days. Even since our probably last session, I think we've had a couple more updates and things, and we're fresh off a couple of shows that are still going on out there, Atlanta and the Home Furnishings Supply Show. So starting with a really fascinating topic in general, what are the changes that you, Sana and Julie, see out there to finding what the trends are in this industry and being able to capitalize on those for your design work and your project evaluations, and the changes and the shifts in the world at large that you see to come? Really briefly. Sana, go ahead, you can start.
So from my perspective, honestly, I'm still taking it all in. I think there certainly are changes that everybody's aware of, a kind of a tendency more towards comfort and more towards nesting and staying home. I do think that we are not at the end of the tunnel yet. So the problems that we all seem to think are going to be lifting immediately are not. So I think all the lessons that we've learned through the last year in terms of maybe slowing down a little bit, slowing down production, allowing timelines to catch up are going to be with us for a while. So that's what I would say.
Sure. And Julie, I'm sure you're finding that utilizing the digital piece of education and outreach has probably been really useful. How is that playing into the changes and trends, and do you see that continuing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be talking a lot about this today, but I mean, just the advancement of certain technologies is going to be a huge factor in design in the next 10 years. And not just digital technology, but research into biomaterials as well is really shaping quite a bit. And I think that, you know, especially given the pandemic and people kind of realizing that we can't just continue with how we were doing things before, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of changes coming forth.
Yes, and I think your highlights on innovative technologies in materials and textiles is fascinating. So I'm really excited for you to be able to share that with everyone. So without further ado, I know you both have a great presentation for us, and why don't we start there? We will have time at the end of the presentation for questions from the group. So while you are viewing, you're welcome to pop those into the Q&A section, and we will go through those at the end and try to group like questions. So I think we can start there. Before we start, I do want to add, however, that Julie, you have a really tremendous bio, and we neglected to say that at the beginning. So let me just add that Julie Muniz is a trend forecasting consultant and curator with over 15 years of expertise in the direct-to-consumer home design industry. She forecasts and advises brands on the major macro forces to strategically prepare them for future market and sales patterns. So we're obviously going to learn a lot today. She received her Master's of Arts from the Bard Graduate Center in New York, and her extensive background in material culture and design history, coupled with a refined curatorial eye, have made Julie a recognized thought leader in the design industry. With an intuitive sense of societal shifts, Julie's unique insight into future cultural and consumer patterns has become sought after by leading consumer brands. Her past partnerships include Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Oakland Museum in California, and Heath Ceramics, to name a few. Her expertise has been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, and Business of Home. And Sana Baker is a textile design consultant and trend watcher specializing in luxury home products. Over the last 25 years, she has helped craft collections of fabric, rugs, bedding, and wallpaper for the likes of Junho, David Phoenix, Barbara Barry, and Schumacher. She's also been a ghost designer on more than a few licensed lines for many name designers. So welcome to you both, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share your presentation and your expertise with us. Really, really great presentation. I'm excited for you all to see. So without further ado, let's talk about the future of home decor.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. Julie and I are looking forward to presenting to you a look at trend and what will be important in home design in the next decade. We'll be touching a lot on the influence of nature, and we'll also be looking at a case study in the cycles of trend using Art Deco. And then we'll be moving from there into our forecasts for the next 3 to 10 years. Julie?
Yeah, so as Sana said, we're going to be really focusing a lot on the influence of nature. And of course, nature has been an influence in art and design going back probably since man could draw on cave walls. So, but I think what's going to be happening and what we are really going to start to see and are already starting to see is people looking towards nature for different types of things, not just for beautification, but also for as inspiration for solutions. And we're looking at ways that we can use nature or inspired by nature in new, exciting new patterns. So that's what Sana and I are going to talk about. But first, we're going to give you a quick overview of kind of what trends are, and then the case study of Art Deco.
So what is a trend? You can ask 10 different designers and you'll get 10 different answers. One of the knee-jerk responses I get is, oh, I'm not interested in trend. I'm not really affected by a trend. But I think it's important for us as designers and as consumers to dig a little bit deeper. We are, in fact, affected by our own desire for beauty, our desire for innovation and for freshness. We're also affected by the society around us. And I think if we have a head in the sand attitude about it, it takes away from our power to see what drives us and from our ability to cultivate discernment. There's a few different words to describe trend, and I feel like fad or movement or tendency are useful, but I wish we had more. I wish there were more words to describe the long range changes that drive our taste and our buying decisions. But since trend is the prevailing word, let's look at the dictionary definition. So it's a prevailing tendency, an inclination, what's hip or popular. These tendencies do indeed have a huge impact on interior design, and whether we realize it or not, we are definitely affected by changing tastes and tendencies. Next slide. I've spent over 20 years designing textiles for home furnishings, so trends have always been important in my work. For the last several years, I've been sharing my observations with other designers in the Textile Eye, which is my quarterly report. As a designer and trend spotter, I think of trend as the ever-changing human appetite for beauty. This appetite generally works in cycles, and color is a perfect example. Tastes ebb and flow. A color that we used to love can start to feel stale, and colors that we ignored or even disliked can actually become new favorites and become very exciting. This is a perfect example of changing tastes at work, and it affects everything we do as designers. Sure.
So Sana has a great skill of being able to look at lots of different types of things and be able to pull out those common threads. And I take a little bit of a different approach to my practice. I look longer range. So I look at what those threads are, and then I'm always asking myself, why is this happening? Why is it happening now? And then, of course, what is this signaling that's going to come next? So as an example of that, I have a picture here of the Mars house, which is done by artist Krista Kim last year, and she sold this as an NFT. It's actually not just this one room or this one picture, but it's a full house that you can go through on a digital platform. And it was one of the first houses, one of the first things that kind of happened during this big giant NFT boom that we're in. But it's also signaling some of the things that are going to be happening in the world of home design and how the digital marketplace is going to affect that. And so while Sana said everybody has their own definition of a trend, of course, science does too. And I thought we would look at how they approach trends to kind of look to see how we can use that. So in science, there's what's called the diffusion of innovation. And that was first presented by a sociologist named Everett Rogers in 1962. And he talks a lot about how there's beginning at the very first, they're the innovators. So these are the Steve Jobs of the world, the Elon Musks, who are kind of trying to find new ways to do things. And around them, there's usually a circle of early adopters. But that's not quite yet what the trend is. A trend isn't until we get into that early majority kind of arc. And before it does that, it has to do what they say is jump the chasm. And there's this giant chasm that's here between early adopters and the early majority. And that chasm, that tipping point is generally around 15%. So when the general public adopts enough, when there's enough people that adopt it, it jumps the chasm, and that's when it starts to become a trend. We see this also happening in terms of our product lifestyles and our decor that we do as well. There's an introduction of new patterns and new themes, and there's a certain amount of growth, but it's not until it jumps that chasm, and it tends to be again around 15 to 18% of the population has to adopt that before it actually becomes a trend. And after that, it kind of goes to that typical bell curve that we think of, where there's a high point, there's an apex, and then there starts to be a decline. And finally, the next trend kind of jumps the shark. After the chasm, it jumps the shark, it's over, and we're ready to move on to the next thing.
So this is an example of a slow moving trend. I think about these as macro trends, and this is something that's affecting everyone. The craving for comfort has been changing the way we dress and the way we live for decades. There's been an overarching tendency towards more casual and more comfortable. Of course, this, as I mentioned, has only intensified during COVID. This beautiful living room here is an example of a beautifully designed room by a great designer, but it doesn't really look like how we want to live anymore. Gone are the days of these kind of formal rooms. And now what we want is casual. We all want a place where we can put our feet up and relax. Maybe it doesn't matter if there's red wine spilled on that bleach cleanable white chair and the dog is up on the sofa. It's really something that we are seeing taking a long time, and it just keeps playing out and playing out. Next slide.
So just like there's micro trends and micro fads, there are just like there's macro trends, there are micro trends. And this is what we consider to be the fads. They kind of come in and out very quickly. And sometimes, usually when people say they don't follow the trends, it's what they're referring to are these very quick, fast moving fads. So along this side, we see some of the ones that we have seen lately. Of course, there's millennial pink that came in and lasted a few years and kind of faded out. Shiplap, the accent wall is really one that's kind of gone out of fashion. I like to think about this Listerine bottle down in the bottom row there, because Chevron was such a huge, huge trend and fad for a while. And then finally, Listerine put it on their bottles, and you kind of knew that that trend was over during that time period.
So in prepping for this presentation, Julie and I were discussing what life will be like in a decade. I joke that it will be the same as now, except that we'll all have fancier phones. So this is a Kravit ad from 2011, which kind of proves my point. Looking at how technology will affect how we live and how our tastes will be is only part of the picture. We all have to keep larger societal shifts in mind and think about how things are going to connect and pull us forward. And certainly in the home furnishings industry, we are lucky that things move a little bit more slowly than they do in fashion. And I think this is a great example because the phone, I think, looks probably more dated than the pillows do. Next slide.
So Sana and I decided to start this off with kind of a case study. We chose Art Deco because that is kind of the hot trend that's happening in decor right now. Lots of things are being influenced by it. And certainly people are excited about the Roaring 20s, the renewed Roaring 20s that we're just starting to enter now. I'm going to start off this, I'm going to put on my historian hat and give you a very quick overview, that the 5-minute encapsulation of about 40 years here. So hang on, I'm going to try to explain to you just sort of what the main motifs are, and then we can see about how they're being interpreted today. So Art Deco, we kind of think about that as happening in the 20s, and that certainly was that apex of that bell curve that we saw earlier. But we have to remember that it really lasted almost 40 years. So I put the dates up here, mostly as a reminder. It has its roots in the Vienna Succession movement, which really started around the very beginning of the 20th century. And it goes all the way up through different iterations, all the way up to the beginning of World War II. If you think about how it looks different in, like, say, streamline design, it's also part of an Art Deco kind of general philosophy, but it's actually a very different look. So trends like these overarching movements and styles can have different iterations to them, but still be part of that general movement. So Art Deco had a lot of influences. I'm just going to cover a few of them. And some of the main ones, one of the most important ones was the avant-garde artists that were really working and kind of shaking up the art world at this time. So it took a lot of color from the Fauvists. It took that idea of speed and movement and streamline from Futurism. And of course, it took a lot of those geometric elements from works of the Cubists, de Stijl, and Constructivism. In addition to that, Art Deco was very much about kind of modern advances. It was supposed to be a modern type of design for a modern world. And so it looked to the modern world and the industry of the new world as inspiration. So you see a lot of elements of industry in it. So elements of the skyscraper, elements of the machine, things that symbolized speed and movement also was part of why they were really interested in that. In addition, it also looked to a lot of cultural appropriation and exoticism. There was a lot of things that were happening that were opening up new cultures to the West, and they kind of took and picked and chose what they wanted to, and they really didn't care about blending and reusing and appropriating these styles. There was this Orientalism, this desire for an exotic Orientalist kind of vision, and they didn't care if it was a blend of Egyptian, Japanese, Chinese, or anything else. What they wanted was that exoticism. And lastly, even though it was a modern style, it also took a lot of inspiration from some of the historical styles as well. So you have the neoclassicism was very much an influence of it. They had regional traditions, and of course we have some of the Louis styles that were also represented. I'd like to show you just sort of some of these inspirations. I think this is just a fun slide. A lot of these cultural and societal changes that were happening really had an influence on the movement as well. So, of course, people think about King Tut's tomb, which was discovered in 1922, and it obviously had an influence on that Egyptomania that was spreading through the West during that time period. They took that very literally, of course. You can see this Harper's Bazaar cover that really is taking that headpiece of King Tut and reinterpreting it on the frieze of the magazine. But in addition to that, there is also the discovery of Knossos, which is the Minoan civilization, It was discovered in 1911. And I love to kind of remind people about that because I think a lot of those stylistic elements of Art Deco, including the flattening of kind of nature, the elongation of the figure, you can really see them taking that almost verbatim from these frescoes from Knossos. So on the far right, you see the Prince of the Lilies, which is one of the famous frescoes from that city. And right next to it, you see this beautiful kind of showgirl from one of the posters of the Paris Review. And you can see how, I mean, from the plumed headdress to the kind of simplified swirls. And I love how the lilies kind of, and the fresco look very simplified and flattened. You can really see how some of these elements are taken very much verbatim from some of these cultural discoveries. So I'm going to go over the motifs that we're going to look at. The first and one of the most common ones you see is the fan motif. It's also considered to be a sunburst, a palm sometimes, a fountain, a feather, a lotus. Really, it's that kind of spread out motif of a fan kind of shape. And it often appears in lots of different iterations, which you can see some that I've put here just as examples. And I just want to, as a side note, draw your attention to the elevator doors from the Chrysler building on the far left. And you can see that that fan shape is also kind of taking the shape of an Egyptian lotus here. But if you look at the lilies that are beside the door along the side, you can see that those, as an example, are very similar to the Prince of the Lily fresco that we saw in the previous slide. Elements of industry are also often featured in Art Deco decor. They were very much interested in things like the skyscraper, which directly influenced textile design and furniture design. Elements of the machine, certainly, and of course, showing how fast the machine was. So this kind of streamlined effect to show that they were a modern civilization, a modern world, and were using advanced technology as opposed to some of the cultures that they were appropriating from. And I think one of the most important things to remember, and we're going to be coming back a lot talking about nature, is how Art Deco really flattened it and stylized it. So if you think about Art Nouveau, which was the prevailing style that came before Art Deco, it was very much kind of nature gone wild. You know, it kind of took over, and you had those beautiful scrolled, tendril, kind of whiplash curves, whereas Art Deco really flattened all of that. It was very much controlling nature at this point. So you have very much kind of a flattening, a repetitiveness. Things were very symmetrical. And I love that you have those kind of Macintosh or Cubist roses that you see very often, of course, first popularized by Charles René Macintosh, but then used constantly throughout Art Deco. And it's very much just a very simplified, abstracted rose pattern, but you see it in lots and lots of different iterations.
Okay, so let's take a look at the current incarnation of Art Deco, which started about a decade ago and we think is about halfway through its cycle. It's come in and out of fashion since its birth in the early 1900s. I think many of us here can probably remember the 80s version, which was very clean, very Miami Vice, lots of fresh colors. So the chair that we're looking at here is a great example of the current iteration. This was designed by Patricia Urquiola from Moroso. It has all the elegant restraint of Deco with curves and straight lines used together for great effect. But the cantilevered backrest and the upholstery that continues straight to the floor with no toe kick gives it a contemporary feeling. Next slide. So let's look at timing. This chart shows the milestones in the current Deco craze set against the diffusion of innovation curve that Julie explained to us earlier. The trend started about 10 years ago, and we think it's just about hitting its peak. We can take a closer look in the next slide. So at the far right, circa 2011, this is an AD cover announcing Art Deco's comeback. Below that, we have an experimental font from the same year. It has a very machine age vibe to it. The Great Gatsby was released in 2013. That was the same year as the historic French fabric house Prel teamed up with Adidas to make these fantastic Stan Smiths, which I covet. Next to that is India Madhvi's sketch in London, 2014, probably one of the most popular Instagram spots of its time. And then as we go through, there's a Brunswick collection, there's a pretty fantastic Bentley, a Mercedes concept car, Marc Jacobs doing his whole apartment in perfect vintage deco. And then when we come to the far right, what we see at the top is the newly opened members only club in Los Angeles called the Brightly. So this was designed by Martin Brudnitsky, who's a very hip European designer. This shows us that deco is still very important at the high end in Europe, at the cutting edge, but the look is also trickling down, as we can see in the lower right. This is a deco sheet set, which is now available at Target. So we're seeing this is a little bit past its product maturity curve, and we think we're going to be seeing it coming more and more into the mainstream. So whenever a look is revived, there are plenty of examples of fairly literal versions that come out. There are some faithful reissues of early masterpieces, and there are always some terrible copies. So at the top is a straightforward deco sofa done in velvet with a channel back and a metallic base. This is from an online retailer called the Mod Shop. Bottom left is a very elegant hand-cut crystal decanter from Artel. But if $800 for the decanter is too much of an investment, you can go with the shower curtain in the lower right and bring those beautiful Chrysler doors right into your bathroom. Next. So this is a different approach to the deco revival. What I see is a masterful reinterpretation by designer Ini Archibong for Say. This was shown at Salone del Mobile in 2019. Again, we see the rounded shapes, this sort of pink plush upholstery. This time it's in a chenille. And we also have the metallic base, but this time the effect is modern because it's a little off kilter and it's just, the seaming is so interesting. So it's always very exciting to see new life breathed into a style like this. Next slide. As a surface designer, I am obsessed with motifs. I loved hearing and seeing what Julie was presenting. And this is a great example of the fan or starburst shape that she presented. So these are wall coverings, these are embroideries, different types of looks that are available now. And everything that I'm showing, by the way, in this section of the presentation are currently on the market and have been recently introduced. Next slide. So this is a gorgeous example of an Amini rug. It uses a deconstructed fan pattern for a very modern effect. So even though the motifs have a deco vibe and even the color, I think the way that they've been deconstructed and laid out, and then the addition of that yellow really gives it a lovely modern feeling. Next slide. Now we get to the Cubist rose. This is being interpreted right now in a number of ways. There's a wonderful rug by Cristina Celestino, and at right, there's the tiles. In the middle is Dedar's new collection that uses these simplified motifs that have almost a Japanese feeling because of how flattened they are and because of the layout with the stripe overlaying. Next slide. So the machine age is what we see here. The influence is very strong. The connotations of speed and industry are feeling particularly interesting right now. Geometry, especially perfect circles and straight lines, show up in many of these products. Some of the details are looking almost like gears or pulleys. I'm seeing still a lot of the streamlined Bauhaus and machine age shapes coming out of Europe. So I do think that these kind of metropolis-like, almost brutalist influences are going to continue very strongly. Next slide. So here's just a few more examples of where we are currently at with the deco reinvention. We've got 3 wall coverings, the De Gournay machine-like embossed gold on the left, this wonderful objet de curiosité, which is almost like Josephine Baker on your wall, and with that fantastic plumage is really fun. A lotus and then a leaf from Karen Sejo showing this beautiful symmetry and flattening that's so typical of Deco. Julie?
Yeah, so Sana and I are going to now move into what our predictions are going forward. And we kind of talked about this a lot, and we've decided to call this new trend that's starting to emerge neo-naturalism. The reason we're doing that is because it is taking and looking at nature, but we feel like it's looking at it in a new and different way. It's using nature both as an aesthetic kind of source, but also as an inspiration in terms of processes and materials. And so Sana's going to start off with her 3 to 5 year forecast, and then I will follow up with my 5 to 10 year.
All right. So what are the first steps on this journey towards neo-naturalism? What are we going to be seeing now and in the next 3 to 5 years? So what I'm noticing is a real tension between craving more interaction with nature, especially living city-bound, often far from wild places. And after a year of lockdown in COVID, many of us that do live in cities are not able to get out into nature. Climate change and disappearing species are harsh realities that we often don't quite know how to process. And so what I'm seeing here is an overarching theme that I'm calling bucolic bubble. We're creating a kind of an idealized simulacrum of nature that can be brought into our homes. At right is an art installation from Burning Man 2017. This piece of art is called The Tree of Tenere. It's by Symmetry Lab. It had 170,000 LED lights in its leaves, and the colors would change in reaction to the sounds in its vicinity. It was really a charming installation, and it was a great example of a simulacrum of nature. So next, we're going to walk through a number of sub-themes that illustrate how this tendency will play out. So in hyper surreal, we're seeing a very super realistic approach, a wallpaper left by Superflower Studios that uses high-res photography of flowers and plants to create this kind of amazing repeat that just draws you in. Next is a fantastical flower set against a striped ground. By the way, I am seeing more floral stripes coming in. It puts me right back to my early days in the industry. But what really makes this example over the top is combination of realistic rendering and scale. So this is a gigantic blossom. It's over 5 feet high. Then at right, we see a piece by Carmen Alman, which is a bouquet made of metal, wire, and enamel paint, creating a flower that will never fade or wilt. Next. These are a few more pieces. These are by David Wiseman, who's an artist that uses brass, porcelain, and crystal to mimic nature. These pieces just have a lovely nostalgic quality, especially the one at right, which is called Lost Valley. I'm particularly enamored of the porcelain owl. It just has so much personality. Next slide. So Maxi Flower. Americans, I'm seeing, are more open than ever to joy and color after lockdown, and maximalism and granny chic are going to continue. So in Maxi Flower, we're seeing a lot of small and mid-scale patterns, which are very versatile in pattern mixing. And a lot of the new designs will continue to use these flattened and stylized motifs. I'm a huge fan of this Morin Giles leather at the right, which almost looks like a cross between a camo and a floral. Next. Can we go to the next slide, Julie? I'm not sure if it's delayed on my end.
Sorry. I
okay,
have it.
Thank you.
Do you have it?
I can see it now. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So here are a few more exuberant patterns with a maximalist kind of vibe. The wallpaper from Maisie Path at right is an example of a work tied to a specific place. And I believe we're going to be seeing more and more of this. The woods of New England and childhood walks are what inspires designers Alexis Odette, who is the founder of Maisie Path. And on the right, we see work from the House of Harris. This is an Australian company, and they are in turn inspired by the flora and fauna of Australia. Next slide, please.
You got it?
I'm still seeing the, okay, now I've got it. We're on a little delay.
Yeah,
No, it's
yeah,
okay.
no, sorry.
So
Go
we're
ahead.
going to be seeing a lot of leaves. I started in the industry in the early 90s, and abstracted leaf designs were at the top of the curve, if not a little over. They started to feel a little played out. But the time is right for these abstracted leaf designs to be coming back in, and especially when they're treated with some imagination and artistry, they can look really fresh. I especially love the Suzanne Tick embroidery on the faux leather, which sets little leaf shapes against these very straight lines. And for me, it conjures up a kind of an image of a post-apocalyptic world with vines taking over an abandoned building. And there are some other examples here of these motifs being used in 3D lighting or in more flattened wall coverings. Next slide, please. So this is, we're seeing more pressed leaf looks here. At the left, there's a beautiful indoor-outdoor dining room from designer Marjorie Scoras. This is in Merida, Mexico. And I really love the juxtaposition of the kind of flattened coral with the more photorealistic mural on the wall. At left, this is from the Kips Bay Palm Springs show house that closed recently. This is by SMI Landscape Architecture, and it's an outdoor enclosure using these lacy metal panels with this meandering. Next. So our next slide is going to be the long view. Are you guys seeing the long view? I can't tell. Okay, great. The bucolic vibe is continuing with these land and seascape inspired patterns. I personally love the idea of bringing a long view into spaces where you might not be able to look out a window to see a beautiful landscape. This allows the eye to move around the meandering patterns, and it has a wonderful relaxing quality to it. Next slide, please.
I have it up.
Okay, great. So now we are going to be looking at Organica. This is likely the most important of the sub-themes that we're seeing here. Yep, this is dominated by leaf motifs. These designs are going to be textural, layered, and very tactile, a little bit more abstracted. The Cox London sconce at the left is a perfect example showing the texture and the imperfection of a real leaf in a metal sconce. Next slide, please. So we have another fantastic mirror from Cox London that uses layers of glass leaves to mimic nature. And then on the right, this is a set of stoneware from Nom Living. It mixes rustic and casual finishes with these very cool veined leaf patterns. Next slide, please. Continuing on with this theme, this is a wall-sized design from Francesca Zobili for Wall & Deco. While the forms are looking like abstracted leaves or flowers, they were actually created by a technique called string pull, where the artist coats a thread with paint and then sandwiches it between two sheets of paper and pulls it out to create the artwork. So if you're looking for a creative project, search on Google. This one looks really fun. I've been meaning to work on it, but I have not had a chance yet. And then at right, this is a product from Organoid Wallpaper. This is an Austrian firm specializing in wall coverings made of pressed leaves and hay. They're completely sustainable, they're visually charming, and they also will fill a space with a beautiful meadow-like scent. So Julie, on to the 5 to 10 years.
Okay, so thank you, Sana. I'm sorry you had some delays with the slides there. Hopefully this will move without problems. So I'm going to take a long-term lens to this. I'm looking 5 to 10 years out. And really my main focus with this is going to be on technology that's changing, and it will change, continue to change how we design. Very specifically, I'm looking at how nature and technology and design and science are all merging together. So biomimicry it's been around for several decades now. I guess you could say it's been around for longer than that, but it can be anything from just taking and being inspired very directly by nature, like taking the fan shape of a ginkgo leaf and turning it into a seat pan and back, as the Lanes have done here. But I think as we move into what we're calling neo-naturalism, we're going to be seeing how biomimicry and biodesign is going to really change and become something very different than something so literal. I've broken this down into three main themes. The first theme I'm calling talking about my generation, kind of taking a fun little look at it there. But in this case, I'm not looking and talking about the type of generation in terms of an age cohort, but rather the type of generation in terms of how nature grows and how we grow as humans. So very specifically, a lot of designers are using technology kind of helping to design. So we have here this bone chair by Joris Larman, who's a Dutch designer. He started doing these in 2006. And what he's using is what's called a digital seed, which is basically a digital program, an algorithm and software that helps the designer design. So within that software, he has certain code that says, okay, I'm making a chair. It's going to have 3 legs and an arm. And very specifically, he tells the program that this chair is going to be generated the same way that our body generates bones. So it's going to add material and strength where it's needed, and it's going to take less material where it's not needed. So this in basically what it does is creates a chair that's as strong as possible using the least amount of material as possible. So digital seeds are one thing that's really interesting. A few designers are using them, but I'm going to show you how this works in terms of textiles, because I know that this is the Textile Alliance. I tend to be a furniture historian, but I am going to show you how this all relates. So on the far left, you see the Luna textile, their Indus pattern. And this is also using a computer generated program that helps to create the pattern on this textile. This is jacquard loomed, so that as the loom is creating the actual textile, the computer program is generating the pattern. So this textile does not have a repeat, and it can go on forever and ever and ever without having a single repeat. And that's just how these programs are designed to work, that they are generating and regenerating certain patterns, certain growth patterns, certain aspects. And it can be different every single time because as you know, there's no 2 snowflakes in the world, even though all water crystallizes the same kind of way. Another example of this is a company called Nervous Systems, and you can see their dress in the center here. This is their kinematic dress. They did this in 2013, and this is actually in the collection at MoMA now. The company uses a lot of different types of generative software, and they produce things from lamps to jigsaw puzzles to jewelry, all sorts of things. And they're based on different ways nature generates. So based on like how a geode forms or how cells regenerate or how plants grow leaves, that kind of thing. So this dress, it's actually very interesting. It's 3D printed, and it's 3D printed all in one piece. So it's 3D printed flat, but it's 3D printed in a way that has these little tiny elements, pieces, and they're all hinged. And they're hinged so wonderfully that this fabric, the plastic of this dress actually drapes and moves as if it were fabric. It's really kind of fascinating. They actually have a web-based program that you can go in and you can tell the program, I want this silhouette of the dress, I want these types of shapes, I want big cells here and small cells there, and it will recreate that as you're doing it and moving along in the web-based program to create a dress. And then when it's 3D printed, again, it's 3D printed in one piece, completely flat, and you lift it up and you have this amazing dress that moves like fabric. And lastly, on the far right here, I have another example of how some of this generative design is working. This is the Mandelroot knit scarf, and it's by a woman. She has a company called Knit Yak. And again, she's using a generative design software to create this. So this is actually generated pixels based on the Mandelbrot set equation. Please do not ask me what that is. It's some sort of mathematical equation that has to do with fractals, but it creates these different patterns based on the fractal kind of mathematical equation. So she does that to create the pattern that she wants in the scarf. Then she machine knits it and hand finishes it. And what I find so fascinating about this is this was done in 2017. And she actually started with a crowdfunded kind of Kickstarter program to create these. And now she's made a whole business doing this. So there are no two scarves that are alike, because every time oh, sorry about that. Sorry about this. Let me try this. Are we back up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Sana. So I am going to move on. Sorry about that. My next theme is called Under the Microscope, and I'm looking at how designers are really being inspired by nature in a new way. So this way is actually looking at the cellular world. And I find this really fascinating. We see this happening quite a bit. And so this is just one example. This is the biomimicry chair by Lillian van Dahl. She's another Dutch designer. She was interested in making a chair, a soft seat chair, but she didn't want to have to use all those layers of, foam and upholstery and different materials for the frame. So instead, she looked at the cellular world, and very specifically, you can see that in the background, she's looking at a microscopic picture of a cross section of a corn stalk. And it's been dyed to give it some color. But she was really interested in how those cells can expand and contract depending on how much moisture they have in them or how much compression they have. And from that idea, she created this chair that's 3D printed out of one single material. So even though it's not a biomaterial, it's still much easier to recycle than if she were to make it out of multiple pieces. I'm going to look at seeing how this kind of creates these ideas of cellular design end up looking in terms of pattern. On the upper left, we have a tile pattern called by Sarah Mike PMA. This is their shades pattern of 2018. And it's just another idea of this kind of looking at cells, looking at overlapping and seeing kind of like a petri dish of patterns. Underneath that, we see a beautiful teacup by an artist named Coralla Mayuri. And she's pretty recently just sort of come on the scene, and she's been getting a lot of recognition. Her stuff is really unique. These are all hand-painted ceramics. She often uses some gold luster to give it some sort of idea of preciousness and very exquisite kind of feel to it. But as you can see, it's very much like this idea of some mildew growing on the teacup or cellular ideas kind of taking over. And a lot of her pieces look that way. In the upper right, we have this beautiful hand-tufted rug by Lisanne Frige. I'm sorry, Frige. I was going to look up her name to see how to pronounce it. I think I'm probably totally blowing this, but it's Frisian. And she is very specifically looking at mold stains, mildew stains, and decay, because she wants to create patterns and textiles and rugs that embrace imperfection. And I think that this is really great because I think a lot of designers are finding ways to embrace this imperfection today. And that's one of the ways that neo-naturalism is different than other ways artists have looked at nature. And then lastly, I find this really, really fascinating, but we have this beautiful silk textile and it has a dye on it done by Faber Futures. Now this dye, this beautiful purple kind of lilac dye, is actually created by bacteria. So they're very interested in how these biologically based materials can really help us. So they have a type of bacteria that will create this color. And the wonderful thing about it is that it doesn't really use a lot of water to create the color, and it also uses no chemicals. So this dye will actually biodegrade along with the material. Puma just recently did a collaboration with Living Color, which is another design lab, using this dye, and they did it for their kind of concept collection that they did called Design to Fade, which came out last year. And again, the idea, it's designed to fade, it's designed to degrade because then it's more ecologically friendly. So this kind of leads me into my next section, which is all about biomaterials. And the first material I'm going to look at is mycelium. Now, if you don't know what mycelium is, you really should kind of pay attention to it, because in terms of our trend timeline, this is, as we speak, jumping that chasm. Mycelium is, in essence, kind of the root structure of mushrooms. So where you see the mushrooms growing above ground, underground, you have this really fibrous kind of web-like structure that can cover miles and miles and acres of land. And designers have really discovered that this material has a lot of practical uses. So it is strong. You can actually use it as a brick for building material. You can use it in place of styrofoam for foam packing material. And it also makes a really wonderful vegan leather. So these are just 3 examples of some of the design companies, these big brands that are really kind of putting some muscle behind mycelium and giving it that boost it needs to jump that chasm. These have all come out this year or on the verge of coming out. So the first we have on the right is Stella McCartney's Milo top and pants, which came out in March, made completely out of mycelium-based leather called Milo leather, which is produced in the Bay Area, and a company called Bolt Threads in Emeryville. And then we also have the Hermes Victoria bag. They also just released this earlier this year, also made out of a mycelium-based leather. They're using a company called Microworks that creates a mycelium-based leather as well. And they have created one of their famous bags using this new vegan leather. And then lastly, this was just announced last week. Adidas has these wonderful Stan Smith sneakers that are going to be coming out later this year. Also, again, using the Milo leather from Bolt Threads. So I really feel like this is it. This is it, jumping the chasm right now. And as they increase their production, this is going to become more and more popular and become part of consumer buying. And then the last biomaterial I'm going to look at is microalgae. Now, microalgae is not as far along as mycelium in terms of that growth scale, but I think it's a really important material that's going to gain a lot of momentum in the coming years. It is an amazing material. It actually, microalgae can clean air, it can clean water, it can be made into fabrics and textiles. It can also, is a superfood. It's actually quite good for you. And what we're seeing here are the Indus tiles by the Biointegrated Design Lab, which is part of the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. And these are pressure stamped tiles. And I love how they have this wonderful kind of lotus shape. But here it's actually being used for a very specific purpose because it acts as a funnel. So in my next slide, you see here these tiles that when they're up on a wall, which you see in the lower left here, there are all of those grooves are filled with the microalgae, and they then kind of let water dribble over it, and it goes channels through all those grooves. And while it does that, it's removing, the microalgae is removing all of the chemicals, the heavy metals, the cadmium, the lead, all of the dyes that might be in this. And by the time it comes out the bottom, it's actually potable water. So this was inspired because of the heavy amount of textile factories in India has created a problem finding drinkable water. So they created these tiles as an example. And as we know, textiles can be a heavy pollutant in terms of the amount of chemicals that they use. The other example of microalgae is just here on the right, we have, this just came out earlier this year, Philip Lynn collaborated with Charlotte McCurdy to create this beautiful dress, and it's filled with hundreds and hundreds of sequins that are actually made out of microalgae. So in place of using plastics, they found a way to create these beautiful sequins that are biologically based. So again, it's just a way that they're using and finding new uses for biomaterials. I've read that there's starting to be innovation in terms of using microalgae in actual textile production as well. So as that develops, I think that'll be really important. I'm just finishing up here now, and I'm going to end up with a quote by Neri Oxman. She's a professor at the MIT Media Lab and the leader and founder of Mediated Matters, which is an innovator in terms of biomaterials. And she talks that to demolish plastics, we need to align ourselves align our economic models with consumer goods. It takes a village, not a lab. And I think that that's really a key point that we need to remember here, that the innovators can come up with these ideas, but it takes all of us as designers and working within the design industry to adopt these things. So it takes a village to create a trend. It's not just one single person that creates it. It takes all of us to adopt it, to create a better good. And I think as we see science and design and nature kind of starting to blend in the next few years, this is going to become even more important. Sana.
So this brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for joining us for How to Design for the Future. We've come to the end of the journey looking at nature as inspiration for many design movements and how it will play out as neo-naturalism in the coming decade. We hope you've been inspired to pay some deep attention to how trends and technologies are shaping your tastes and decisions and how they're pulling you forward. We hope you've been inspired to be a part of Nary's Village. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anna and Julie, what a wonderful presentation. I think information is just mind-blowing in so many different ways, and hopefully it inspires everyone to go out and do some more research. So that brings me to the all-important question of, where do you find those elements of signaling to let you know what is coming, or is there any advice for research for our viewers of where they can find these next trend signals?
Yeah, it's, I read a lot. I read across a lot of different types of, news feeds and blogs and, everything. And you just have to kind of keep your eye out for those sorts of things. Sana and I have done this presentation before, but I very specifically went to look for textile examples to show this audience. And so as just doing that, I found out more about the wonderful Faber Futures and their design to fade dye, which is really fascinating. Also, I just heard that Lululemon also just announced that they have found a way to use carbon emissions from their factories and somehow create material out of that. So, turning it into ethanol and somehow making that into a textile is really fascinating. And I haven't had a chance to kind of delve into that science about it yet, but again, it's just another signal that I think we're going to be seeing more of.
Well, and also it seems, fashion is typically our leader in the home industry, and we see a lot of those trends cycle down and become inspiration for home products. And in thinking about how the world has changed over the last 18 months, 2 years, and potentially how we are changing still, I thought myself, I was concerned that without those major fashion and runway shows and presentations and launches, we would be missing something in that design inspiration. But in fact, it seems like from your reporting and research, the launches that are happening are really almost an investment in technology to see what they're doing with this mycelium and all of these amazing new kinds of innovative products.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I would also say, I would suggest too that for our industry specifically, that there's so much innovation on the contract side that it's really important for us to keep an eye on what happens on the contract side, even if we're not looking per se at an office chair, because a lot, like Interface is doing amazing stuff with recycling carbon. There's biodegradable polyester now is coming on the scene in a pretty big way and has kind of, I think, is chasm jumping at this point. So there really are a lot of innovations, and I think there's not going to be one silver bullet. I think, and it's going to be up to us to pick and choose and see what can be scaled and what we can put into our own collections to push that forward. I also was going to plug Julie's newsletter at this point because she does amazing research. And if you want to get in on her knowledge about NFTs and other innovations, you should sign up for her newsletter. It's pretty cool.
Yes, and I believe Carrie put the information in the chat box. If not, then we will put that in now. And also for Sana, your publication and membership, the Textile Eye. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Textile Eye is a subscriber-based quarterly trend and show report that's focusing very much on high-end home textiles and surface design. And I've got some fun goodies in my free membership. So if people want to jump on and join up, they can see what we have to offer. And we do cover innovations. We mainly cover more design inspiration, but especially on the contract side, we are keeping up with, we're doing our best to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah, I think you're both doing an amazing job. And before I ask you one of the next questions, I just want to add that if people have any questions for you, please put them in the chat box now, and we will be addressing them. We don't have that much time left, but certainly if there's anything pressing, we want to make sure we talk about that. In this whole conversation, Sana, I wanted to ask you first about the scalability and the immediacy, or at least within your 3 to 5 year timeline. How are you seeing textiles specifically evolve with these new innovations? Because I know there's such a challenge with scale on some of these. What are the innovative textiles that you're seeing right now versus a little farther down the road?
Things that I'm seeing right now are the biodegradable poly that I mentioned. I think Valdez is actually working on putting that out into the world, and there's a Canadian mill as well that's innovating there. Also, the Sequel is an amazing fiber where, you know, they're actually taking bottles out of the ocean and recycling the plastic. So those are two that come to mind. I'm also seeing.
I think shrimp skins also, right? Isn't Sequel?
I just saw something about that, and I haven't read it yet. So
yeah. It's a California company also.
Yeah, the dyeing, I think, right? Yeah. So those are some that are coming, and I also am feeling that there's. I hope that there's a swing back towards people investing in higher quality things that handmade things that are made closer to them, where they can know the maker or something along those lines. And that is going to take the less we can put into landfill, the better, you know. So if you invest in a beautiful carpet and keep it for 10, 20 years and pass it down, that's just much better. So that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I hope so too. And along with that, how does that future vision, someone wants to know, impact colors, clarity, dusty values, you know, those kinds of elements in color design work?
Well, I think that if you look at things like the bacteria dye and that sort of thing, you know, those you know, very scientifically based, you know, they come up with a certain color. They're not adding color to it. This is the color that the bacteria is producing. So as these kind of innovations continue to occur, I think that they will have an impact on color. I love that microalgae green, and as now microalgae kind of continues along its innovation cycle, I think that green is going to become really, really popular. You know, so I think that as you see these things and you see the natural elements and how they are creating their own color schemes in that sense, you know, those colors will then kind of filter down into our decor.
I know, Carrie, you have a couple questions, but I just wanted to add on that point something that really made a mention or stuck out to me was also this incorporation of using multiple senses. So not just color and tactileness, but that meta wallpaper, I've forgotten the name and who did it, but the sense of smell being utilized in these new innovations too. It's fascinating. Do you see that as an evolution as well, possibly, or not yet?
Sana, did you want to?
Yeah, I think materiality is going to become more and more important. So really understanding what something's made of and why, and like that dress with the hinges and those things. I mean, that might have a sound quality to it as well that we haven't really talked about. So I think, yeah, it is. Smell is definitely an interesting thing. Yeah.
I will also say, I mean, I was just going to say, I didn't even touch on the whole thing about smart fabrics and everything, but the interweaving of technology into the fabric, so it'll actually, you know, take your pulse and feel you and become, you know, more of a biological element as well. That's really kind of cutting edge and coming on the scene as well. So I think that, you know, in terms of the various senses, you know, you and your fabric will become one.
Literally.
Yes.
Sarah, you had a couple questions?
Yeah, one of the guests asked about how the trajectory of these trends has been affected by the last, 18 months of COVID and the shutdowns. Do you see, or how do you see that affecting these trends?
I think that COVID is like the great accelerator of everything. I mean, it's accelerated how we have adopted certain technologies. It's accelerated lots of different things. And definitely, I think that one of the biggest things that it's going to have an impact on is how we view nature, because now nature is seen for a couple of ways. We want to go outside. We want that fresh air. So indoor, outdoor spaces are going to become more and more important, but also, in terms of, nature as a way to kind of save us. We're really focused now on climate change and how that is affecting us. And so that idea of the natural world and being a part of it and kind of finding ways that we can design that is more aligned to that natural world is becoming more and more important. And I think that COVID had quite an impact in accelerating that.
Yeah. I would add, I completely agree with that. I also think that COVID has, what I'm seeing a kind of another one of these big macro trends, especially in the States, is a tendency more towards individualism, and that we don't have to be quite as cookie cutter. And I think during COVID, when we just sort of retreated into our own little bubble of social media, we came out thinking, oh, I know what's in fashion. I know, because we were in our little bubble, right? But there's 17 of them. So there's so many more points of view and perspectives that are being delved into. So what I'm seeing is a little bit more variety, both on the sides of innovation and having to pick and choose what innovations work, and also on the side of style. And that means it becomes more and more important for you to kind of connect with your tribe in terms of, or your crowd in terms of marketing and telling your story.
So does that mean that design, in your perspective, is becoming more myopic because in order to collaborate, you have to find like minds? Or is that making the design process richer because you have so many points of view coming together? I think collaboration is so difficult anyway, and now with this kind of interaction, it's potentially harder. So is it easier or harder, or how does it change?
I think that it's going to result in more choice overall. And so you've got to be out there looking for the choice and maybe get out of your, little one place that you see. But it's something I really strive to do in the textile eye, is to look at a lot of different collections and a lot of different perspectives. And, maybe something that's big in Europe is a little scary for us right now, but it's going to be coming. So I think as people become more exposed to things, they'll be more open. And I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Julie, go
I
ahead.
was just going to add that I think that, more and more scientists, designers, computer engineers, they're really collaborating together to create a lot of this new innovation. And it's bringing in totally multidisciplinary kind of approach to how we design and how things look. So I think that is just going to open up new worlds instead of just design being within its own little bubble.
Well, and Sana also mentioned the word before, tension. And I think that really speaks a lot, because there are so many seemingly opposite elements to this trend that's coming with naturalism and digital. And, so it seems almost counterintuitive that they would go together and complement each other well. But in fact, it does make a richer experience, it seems, which is fascinating.
Absolutely.
So, Carrie, I think we've gotten through most of the questions and themes in the chat, unless you see any more. I think this has been a phenomenal conversation. We certainly look forward to having more. Carrie, if you want to add anything about the ITA, just as a plug so people can find us and sign up for future programming, we would love to have you. We'd love to have you at one of our shows or one of our events, so we can certainly keep you in the know if you sign up for our newsletter, and Carrie can tell you where to find us.
Yes, so you can find us on the web at internationaltextilealliance.org. Everyone that is registered for this presentation, I will be sharing the recording as well as the link to all of our previous recordings, webinars that we've done over the past year. So there's some great stuff there. And I would encourage you to mark your calendar for November 14th through the 17th. which is our next Showtime event. We would love to have you. And of course, if you'd like to exhibit, I'd be happy to help you with that as well.
So a big thank you to Julie Muniz and Sana Baker. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, it's been phenomenal. And we wish you well in your trend hunting for the next season.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.